Welcome to the Author's Podcast with Lisa Newton. Writing a book is a dream for many people, and in today's society, it has become easier and more important than ever. If you are an expert, speaker, coach, or an authority in your field, having a book is the new business card. It can increase your credibility, enhance your status, and make you the go-to person in your field, opening doors and bringing a flood of opportunities straight to you. You can increase your fees and start choosing the clients you really want to work with. The Author's Podcast show with Lisa Newton is designed to inspire, educate and inform you, both entrepreneur and individual, on how to write a book, as well as writer's tips and strategies on how to actually get that book written. On today's show, you learn more about how to write a book, including writing ideas, marketing, and how to succeed in getting a book written. Here we go with the Author's Podcast, and here is your host, Lisa Newton.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Author's Podcast. Today, my guest is Cesar Espino. He's a serial author and life coach. His mission is to help people to overcome anything through his books, mentoring programs, real estate solutions, and public speaking messages. Cesar's passion for motivation and his drive to succeed go back to his roots. Born in Mexico City into a society of poverty and very little hope, it took years for him to recognize that a larger purpose had been set in front of him. Cesar's recent books are Dare to be Authentic, Volume 5, Let Yourself Prosper, You Can Overcome Anything, Even When the World Says No, and also translated into Spanish, Puedes Superar Cualquier Cosa, Incluso Cuando el Mundo dice no. He has his own podcast, You Can Overcome Anything. So on the line, I should have Cesar Espino.
Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Hi, I'm very well. Thank you very much. So, Cesar, intrigued by your story. So, and I do like the title of your book, You Can Overcome Anything, Even When the World Says No. So, starting at the beginning then, tell me a little bit about Mexico City, because that's where your roots are, and how you came to be an American.
Yeah, so once again, first, thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to be here and share my story with you and your audience. And really, for me, as you mentioned, I was born in Mexico City, and I was born into a time where, even so now, but back then, there was a lot of poverty, right? And my upbringing was really that. I didn't really grow into a middle class or a wealthy family. I think we were probably the lowest of the lowest when it comes down to the classification. And I was only born to just one parent. So I've never met my biological father. I don't know anything about him. So it was really just my mom, my grandmother, and my little brother. And it was the four of us growing together. And one of the things that really resonates with me is that growing up, I didn't have anything, right? Like, I didn't have toys. I didn't have, the clothing. I didn't have what I would probably see now as being more so, normal for kids to have, especially here in the Americas, right? And so I didn't have any of that. And we actually used to live in this one small, what I call my home, but it was a small room, which was no more than 250 square feet of space. And it was made out of sheet metal and plywood and literally right on top of the dirt. And I remember that as if it was yesterday. Yet one thing was that it was very, very comforting to be there because I had the support of my mom, I had the support of my grandmother, and then I had my older brother, right? Now, it wasn't until like the age of 4, I was literally about 4 months into my 4th year, where my mom decided to take her own leap of faith and decided to leave Mexico and come to the United States, chasing that American dream that many people have been chasing for years and years and decades, right? And she left all of us behind. As a matter of fact, we stayed behind. And I call that being one of my first turning points, because at that moment in my life, although I was already poor and my mom and my grandma were doing things to support us, now things had turn around where I had to start working at an early age. And I remember doing different things, which led to us selling food in the flea market. And we were doing that, and that didn't work out too good. Sometimes we would make money, sometimes we would make money, and sometimes because of that, we didn't have much to eat. And I always say that we had the Mexican specialty dish, which is literally a tortilla with grain of salt, and that's all we had to eat. But let me tell you, it was very, very satisfying, and I love definitely just having that simple thing. So anyways, we had that. And then, we graduated from selling food at the flea market, and we graduated to actually sewing clothes for dolls. So my grandmother decided to get a sewing machine for herself, a sewing machine for myself and for my older brother. So we all had our own sewing machines, and we used to sew clothing for dolls so that we can generate some income, right? And so when I look at all of that, it kind of led to where I am now, that entrepreneurial journey, because I grew up with that, right? It wasn't until the age of 10 that my mom finally came back for the second time, and she brought us to the States. So I came to the States when I was 10, and that was another lesson for me. And part of it was because, one, I didn't understand the language. I couldn't speak English. I couldn't communicate. I couldn't do any of that. I didn't have any friends. Everything was very different for me. Like, it was a total night and day type of lifestyle, going from growing up being poor, not having clothes, not having toys, not having, a decent place to stay, and working, to now having all of that. And for the first time in my life, not really having to work. That was definitely different. And
so you had your sewing machine and everything. That was when you were under 10 years old.
Yeah, definitely. So I know how to sew. Yeah, it was around, I think it was around 7 years old. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and another lesson that I remember too is that when I came here, and I think this is where a lot of people go through this, right? I was uncomfortable being here in the States. And a lot of times, now that I see it, it was like, wow, that was like a very great lesson for me. Because I remember telling at that time, my stepdad, who I see as my dad now, I was telling my dad, I'm like, you know what? I don't belong here. You need to take me back to Mexico. And when you think about that, I was so uncomfortable being in the States, not having to work, having clothes, doing all this other stuff, this land of opportunity per se. And I was so uncomfortable with that I was comfortable going back to being poor, going back to working, going back to that reality, because I was so afraid of being uncomfortable. And I think that's one of the things that we as people face throughout our journey in life. Like, there's a lot of times that because we're so uncomfortable on something, it will stop us from doing what we need to do to get comfortable, right? To switch that uncomfortableness to being comfortable.
Yes. So when you experience something, even though in your case it was an improvement, it felt so weird and different that you wanted to go back to the poverty because that's where it was comfortable. That's what you knew. And in life, I suppose, when we have to grow, you've got to face a period of being uncomfortable.
Correct. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, wow.
So yeah, and as I came into the States, and finally I had to surrender. That's another lesson where I surrendered to the fact that this is gonna be my new life. This is gonna be my new purpose. And I'm glad my parents didn't send me back. I'm really glad that they didn't listen to me when I said, hey, I want to go back, because that led to other opportunities, right? And so I surrendered. I finally got to read, write, and started making friends. And then literally just 5 years being in the States, at the age of 15 and a half, I had another, I would say, life lesson. I don't see it as a failure, because I think it's my greatest joy. I was dating this girl, and we ended up getting pregnant, or she got pregnant, I guess. I don't know what's the right way to put it, but anyways, we got pregnant, or she got pregnant. Nevertheless, at the age of 15 and a half, we're going to be expecting. And so I was 16, and my daughter was born, right? And so again, I was a kid having a kid. I was a kid raising a kid, and just being here five years in the States, that was like another major thing in my life. And I remember telling myself and telling my ex, my daughter's mom at that time, said, hey, you know what? I'm going to make sure that I do a couple of things. Number one, I'm going to make sure that I give my daughter everything that I didn't have when I was a kid. I want to make sure that my daughter does not go through the same things that I went through as a kid. So I'm going to provide for her. Number two, I got to get to work. I got to start looking at how can I make sure that I can give her that life, that I can give her the opportunity, that I can give her something that I didn't have as a kid. And so that, just led to more, I got to go to school. I have to make sure that I get good grades. I have to make sure that I graduate and I start this journey in my life. And I can tell you up until this point, I've gone through so many different obstacles that not necessarily proud of, yet I've gone through a lot of different obstacles that I had to overcome. And that's the reason why I decided to write my book, to not only tell my story because I lived it, and there was many different lessons that I've learned, also because I know that perhaps there's going to be somebody that is going to resonate with either one idea, one thought, one phrase that's going to be like, oh, that's me. I can see myself there. Now I can kind of take it from that perspective and start shifting my mind to make sure that I can also turn my life around.
No, absolutely. And I think, you've gone through so much at such a young age, my goodness, that there's lessons in there for everyone. I mean, even if you haven't had to immigrate and learn a new language and the whole culture shock, there are some people who've had to change schools, they've changed jobs. Yep. They were in one place 1 minute, in another place the next. And it's all about adapting. The situations that got thrown at you completely unexpected, not part of the plan, you have to deal with it, and each time you've managed to pick yourself up and keep moving. So you were listening to the Authors Podcast with me, your host, Lisa Newton. You can email me, lisa@lisanewton.co.uk, and remember, we have the Inner Circle, which is for writers just like you, and you can join us at writeabook.net. Your book, You Can Overcome Anything, even when the world says no. So did you receive a lot of no's, or like that whole when the world says no, did you get a lot of negative feedback, lots of no's, lots of doors slammed in your face? Or
yeah, I definitely, again, throughout my life, a lot of the things that I've done, the no's, and you kind of get discouraged. And I've had numerous businesses that I wanted to start at a young age, and many of them didn't go as I planned. Some of them I actually ended up losing a lot of money because of that. And so it comes back to where, like, now I'm discouraging myself. I'm having that self-sabotaging of whether or not this is for me. Like, maybe I was meant to just work for somebody else and kind of go through that journey. And I didn't, I at one point, actually, I gave up. And I'm like, what, that's it. I'm just going to work for somebody else. And then it happened in a couple of years back where I'm like, I think there's a bigger calling, there's a bigger purpose for me, and I'm going to continue to do this, and I'm going to start this journey again. And I'm going to make sure that I can fulfill that journey, because I feel like the calling for me is now to really inspire people, to really aspire and empower them to really have their true potential, right? And so even writing my book, like just writing my book, I myself was actually talking myself out of it, and I think that's what we do as people. A lot of times we talk ourselves out of doing something, whether it's a book, whether it's certainly new business venture, whether it's maybe even just going over and talking to that girl or that guy and letting them know how you feel. Like, sometimes we just talk ourselves out of it. And I remember before I wrote my book, I said, I want to write my book. How can I impact more people? How can I get to more people? And I said, well, what about if I write a book? And then the first thing that came to mind in the back of my mind is this little voice saying, hey, Cesar, you're not a writer, number one. Number two, who's going to read your book? And number three, you don't even like to read books. So why are you going to do this, right? And so I was like telling myself, I'm like, you know what? Yeah, you're kind of right. The last time I read a book was in high school, because I had to read a book for my English class. Other than that, I really don't like reading books. And I'm like, and I'm not a writer. And so I talked myself out of doing that. And it wasn't until maybe a month later or so, and I said, now I there's a bigger purpose. Something deep down told me you have to do this. So I changed the frame. I said, you know what? Well, if nobody reads my book, that's okay. I'm still gonna write it. If nobody likes what I put out, it's okay. I'm still gonna write it, because I want to leave something behind for my daughter. So I took that back to my daughter and say, I want to leave something behind for my daughter, so that when I'm gone, I left something for her and she can see my life unfolded in this book and some lessons. Number two, I'm doing this for me from a purpose of self-accomplishment, right? A lot of times we forget that a lot of the things that we do in life, it is definitely for many people, yet it's also for yourself. So I said, well, what about if I do it for myself, self-accomplishment, and to leave something behind? When I did that, I stopped all the negative thoughts and ideas, and I began writing my book, and I actually put myself a deadline of when to finish the book, and I finished my book under 2.5 months because I was just so into it.
Wow. And how did you go about it? Did you write, are you good at writing like straight onto the laptop or computer for hours at a time, or do you have a set time? For a lot of people, they just don't even know where to start. They just can't motivate themselves. I don't know.
Yeah, right. I mean, I can give you my experience, and I think there's different ways you can go about it. You can either do a ghost writing, or you can write yourself the book yourself. I decided to write the book myself, and pretty much actually all the books that I've done now, I've written the books myself, and it was straight to the laptop. What I can give you though is I was looking around, and I got connected with one person, and he gave me this format, and it's just really a format, and I think when I took that format, it allowed me to more or less organize myself, right? And so this format is a 1-10-10-3. 1 being the book title, or essentially becomes the book title, but is the overall idea of your book, right? So that's the first one. 10 is going to be 10 chapters or 10 titles of each chapter, right? So you can kind of create that outline. So you have 10 chapters. The other 10 are going to be 10 paragraphs within that one chapter, right? For each chapter. And then 3 will be 3 sentences per chapter. So when you create the outline, that's exactly what I did. I took that, and even I didn't know, what was going to be the book title and all that stuff. I actually created the outline on Word, and I put 1 because that's as a placeholder. That's going to be the objective of my book, which is going to be my title. And then I created 10 headers for my book titles, and then below that I created 10 spaces for each of the chapter in each a paragraph for each chapter. And then I created a space for 3 sentences per chapter. And now, guess what? I have an outline. Now I have something to go by. When you complete this, that'll give you a book anywhere between 140 to 150 pages, which is a decent sized book, right? And so that was the first thing that I did. The second thing is, one of the things that I do is I'm an accountability coach. So some of the things that I teach to my students, I also apply that with myself. And I created a weekly task tracker. And I said, okay, this week, what is my objective? What is the end in mind? What am I trying to accomplish this week as it relates to my book? And I said, well, if I want to finish, and I put myself a deadline, I said, I want to be able to finish my book within 3 months. I said, okay, well, if I want to finish my book within 3 months, then what are the smaller tasks that I have to take on? And so I said, well, the smaller task is that I have to do X amount of pages per week. And then the next thing is, well, I got to be able to measure myself. I got to be able to measure that performance to see whether or not I am on track. And then the last thing is you want to start and act on that and take action immediately. So I took all of that and I said, well, I'm going to create a daily task tracker that is going to say I have to do 10 pages per day for me to be able to finish the book on time. There was days, I'll be honest with you, there was days that I wrote 1 page or 2 pages. Now I had to pick up the slack the next day for those pages that I didn't do, right? And I follow that format, the strategy for, for the book writing and also the outline. And again, I finished the book within 2.5 months.
Wow, excellent. So that's really good tips. So that's motivation for anyone out there, because sometimes we don't know where to start. We don't have that any idea. We've just got it sort of all foggy in the mind. But when you've got that 1-10-10-3 formula, if you like, those steps, then at least you've got your outline. You were listening to the Authors Podcast with me, your host, Lisa Newton. You can email me, lisa@lisanewton.co.uk. And remember, we have the Inner Circle, which is for writers just like you, and you can join us at writerbook.net. So if you're just tuning in, I'm talking to Cesar Espino, who is a serial author and life coach. And his book is You Can Overcome Anything, Even When the World Says No. And it's also translated into Spanish. So my question, Cesar, is did you write the book in Spanish, or did you literally translate what you'd written in English back into Spanish? If you know what I mean.
So definitely. So that was one that I started writing the book in Spanish, and then I realized it's gonna take me forever to do it because I was trying to do a direct translation from my English to Spanish, right? And so I ended up just going a different route. So yeah, it was instead of writing, I actually just translated the English version to Spanish, and it took me a little bit longer to do that, and then I just did the proofreading on that at the end. So it's a direct translation. I would say word by word, maybe for the exception of some words from English to Spanish.
And was that for you easier, or was it easier to write in English? Because I speak different languages. I'm always fascinated. I'm just fascinated by language in general.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I found that a little bit harder. I don't know why, although that I speak Spanish literally every day. It was just a little bit harder because I think I lost the touch of, the grammar and, the proper, punctuations and things to that nature. So it was a little bit harder from that perspective, but definitely fulfilling for sure.
No, definitely. So no, that's interesting because for some people, although you can speak the language really well, the written and the grammar part of it is different. It's not the same. It's not the same kind of skill.
Right.
Okay, so just in terms then of how people can get hold of you, how they can work with you, because you're very motivational. I can feel it. I'm just listening to you. I'm just like, yeah, you know what?
Awesome.
Because things could be so difficult in life, and you get through it. You get through to the other end, and you just want to, reach back and encourage other people who might be going through something as well. You can do it too. Do you know what I mean? So
yes.
How can people work with you? What does your business offer them?
Yeah, so people can connect with me through pretty much every social media, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Cesar R. Espino, or you can actually just go to my website, which is www.cesarrespino.com. And from there, you can find pretty much all the different things that I do, and you can connect with me, directly through that.
Right, and you do coaching for people, because you said you're an accountability partner as well.
Yeah. So the different things that I do is I do accountability for people. So I have an accountability program that I have students that come through that. And then I also do mind coaching. So my mind coaching is really about working through obstacles where you have limiting beliefs or negative emotions, or just in general, even toxic people that you have to clear from your mind to help you get to the next level, right? And we definitely have many of those, and it could be either friends or family, even sometimes family, right? So a lot of times when you tap into that, we're definitely looking at it from an unconscious level, on the unconscious mind. And I take all of that and just work with people on a one-on-one basis to clear, whether again it's an emotion or a belief or even toxic people. So that's one thing that I do. I am also a real estate investor, so I do have a mentoring program for people that want to get into real estate investing. And as a matter of fact, my real estate investing program, the very first session that I have with people, I don't even talk about real estate. I actually talk about the mind. And why I focus so much on the mind is because I can give you the tools, I can give you the ideas, I can pretty much give you a blueprint of what you need to do. Except if your mind is not in a healthy place where you get rejected by the first no or the second no or the third no, and then you want to give up, then it doesn't matter what I give you or tell you, you're going to end up giving up. So my whole focus is let's work on your mind. Let's give you some ideas. Let's talk about how you can create a more stronger mind so that when you do get that no once or twice or three times, you're going to be like, okay, that's fine. Just because somebody told me no today doesn't mean there's going to be no forever. So I'm going to continue to move forward, right? And so that's one thing that I also teach on my real estate mentoring program, which is obviously more triggered to just real estate. But again, I do touch on the mindset.
Yeah. And I think that's really important, the mind, because in order to overcome anything, it's that self-talk that we give ourselves.
Yes.
We have to know how to talk to ourselves. And you do some NLP, I because of some of the words you've just said,
Yes.
reframing and stuff.
Yeah, and that's definitely my when I talk about clearing limiting beliefs or emotions or toxic people, it's all through NLP practices. So I am an NLP practitioner, and so it is through that logic or those practices where I help people overcome those things.
Mm. And for the real estate, is it focused on the US market? Is it in a specific city, or is it something that can be applied sort of all over the United States?
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely for the U.S. market, anywhere in the U.S. for sure. It is talking about a couple of different strategies, whether it's either wholesale or buying, fixing, and flipping properties in the U.S. market. So the principles pretty much are the same across the U.S.
Okay. No, very, very, very interesting. I always think though that, I'm in the UK, and they always say that, not always, but statistics have shown that oftentimes when people come from other places to the UK, probably the same in the US, as migrants, so they say, that there is a drive in certain communities because the opportunities are there. And when you come from one place and you go to another and you see and you realize these opportunities are there, you're more likely to, I suppose, spot them or maybe even go for them because you've seen a contrast as to other places where these opportunities aren't there, school and, being able to start a business and things like that. So I think that sometimes that there's that factor there as well.
Yeah, I definitely believe that. Especially if I look at my own story, growing up and being born into a society where there's a lot of corruption, a lot of poverty, because that's how the government decides to have it, and you come to a place where there's the U.S. or any other country that has better opportunities, you have something, and I think this is one big lesson too, is you have the choice and the decision to either take on that opportunity and run with it, or you have the decision or the choice to not do anything about it and drown with yourself with whatever it might be. And a lot of times I tell people that when it comes down to anything, it really comes down to, and I know it's harder or it's not as easy as I say it, yet it comes down to that. It comes down to making a decision on your business, on your relationship, on your friends, on whatever the case may be. It comes down to just making a decision. It comes down to just choosing what's going to be the next step. And sometimes we forget about that. We forget about the fact that we are just one decision or one choice away from keeping a smile in our face, from feeling happy, from being joyful, from being depressed. Like, it really comes down to that. And a lot of that comes down to, again, how you feel inside and how you're going to stand up and your overall physiology and your way of thinking. And it comes down to just that thought, that decision, that choice.
Yes, I love it. And on that note, I thank you very much, Cesar, for being a guest. And listeners, you can get more from Cesar because he does have his own podcast called You Can Overcome Anything. And that's the same title of his book, You Can Overcome Anything, Even When the World Says No. And once again, the website is Cesar R. Espino, and Cesar is spelled Cesar, R for Romeo, Espino, ESPINO.com. Excellent. Cesar, thank you very much for being a guest on the Authors Podcast.
Thank you, Lisa, for having me. I'm really appreciative.
No problem. So listeners, there you have it. Remember, make that note, the 1-10-10-3, and you can overcome anything, absolutely anything. And to hear more from Cesar, CesarRespino.com. Thank you very much for tuning into the Authors Podcast, and I'll see you next time.
You have been listening to the Authors Podcast with Lisa Newton, sponsored by Boogles Limited. Tweet the show at Boogles_books, spelled BOOGLEZ_books. You can also contact your host via the email address lisa at lisanewton.co.uk. And if you want to join our authors community, join the inner circle at www.writeabook.net. You have just been listening to the Authors Podcast with Lisa Newton. See you next time.